In today's story, we follow Clara, an elderly widow who clings to her memories through an old photo album. When her most treasured wedding photo goes missing, Clara's quiet world is shaken, until a group of local teens steps in to help. What begins as a simple search quickly turns into a journey of unexpected friendships, community spirit, and healing. Will they find the photo on time? And how will Clara's life, and theirs, be forever changed? Join us to find out. Be sure to comment on your thoughts, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an inspiring story like this one. Clara Thompson, known to most as Ms. Clara, had lived on Maple Street for nearly half a century. Her small white house with green shutters was a fixture in the neighborhood. The garden out front, once vibrant with roses and tulips, had grown a little wild in recent years, though Clara still tried her best to tend it. The neighbors often saw her outside, clipping back overgrown bushes, her silver hair neatly pulled back into a bun. At 78, she still dressed with care, always in pressed blouses and slacks, no matter how mundane the day. Clara's husband, John, had passed away a decade earlier, and their children lived far away, their lives too busy for frequent visits. Clara didn't mind too much. She had her daily routines: breakfast at 7 a.m., a stroll to the local park at noon, and reading the paper in her front room before bed. She liked orderly things. It made her feel in control, especially in a world that seemed to be changing faster than she could keep up. But the most important part of her day was her walk to the park. It wasn't just about getting out of the house. It was about the memories that clung to the place. The park was where she and John had spent so many happy afternoons, sitting on their favorite bench under the sprawling oak tree. These days, Clara always carries her photo album with her. She'd sit quietly, flipping through the pages, gazing at the yellowed photographs that captured moments of joy from decades past. There was one photo that Clara cherished above all others: her wedding picture. It was the only copy she had, taken on a warm summer day when she and John had promised to spend their lives together. She never left the house without it. But recently something has been bothering her. Each time she flipped through the album, that precious photo seemed harder to find. Jason Reynolds kicked at the loose gravel on the park path, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his hoodie. At 17, Jason wasn't exactly sure where his life was heading. He had always been close to his dad, but his father's death the year before had left a hole in his life that he didn't know how to fill. Some days he found himself at the park just to feel some semblance of peace, as though being outside might clear his head. Today was one of those days, and as usual, his three friends tagged along. Rebecca, the loudest of the group with her bright red hair and fiery spirit; Dylan, the quiet jokester who always had a sly grin on his face; and Mia, the artsy one who could rarely be seen without her sketchbook. Together, they made an odd mix, but somehow it worked. "Hey, look," Rebecca said, elbowing Jason. "There's Ms. Clara." Jason glanced over to where Clara Thompson sat on her usual bench under the oak tree, her photo album resting on her lap. "She's always here," Dylan added, squinting in her direction. "What do you think she looks at in that book all the time?" Mia, who was already sketching the park scene, looked up briefly. "Maybe it's memories. People like that have a lot of history." Jason didn't say anything. He had noticed Clara before, but it wasn't like he knew her. To him, she was just another part of the park scenery, like the old playground that nobody used anymore, or the rusted swings creaking in the breeze. But today, something felt different. Clara didn't look like her usual calm self. She was fidgeting, her hands trembling as she flipped through the pages of her album, her brow furrowed in worry. "She looks upset," Jason muttered. Rebecca, always the first to act, hopped off the bench. "Well, why don't we go see if she's okay? She's old. Maybe she needs help." Jason hesitated. "I don't know, man. Maybe we should just leave her alone." But Rebecca was already walking over, her red hair bouncing as she moved. Dylan and Mia followed, and after a moment of internal debate, Jason did too, his steps slow and uncertain. Clara's heart raced as she spotted the group of teenagers approaching. She didn't know why, but her nerves had been on edge lately. She didn't trust the world as much as she used to. The park, once a safe haven, had started to feel unpredictable. The teenagers were laughing as they walked over, and Clara instinctively clutched her album tighter. What did they want? "Hi, Ms. Clara," Rebecca called out cheerfully. "Are you okay? You look a little upset." Clara glanced up, her hand shaking as she hugged the album to her chest. "I'm fine," she said quickly, though her voice wavered. Jason hung back, letting Rebecca take the lead. He could sense Clara's unease and wasn't sure if this was a good idea. "We just wanted to see if you needed any help," Rebecca continued, her voice gentle now. "You seem like something's bothering you." Clara's eyes darted between them, and her grip on the album tightened. She didn't know these kids. She didn't want to be rude, but the fear was creeping in. The fear of being vulnerable, of being alone and unsure. "No, I don't need help," she said, her voice trembling. "Please, just leave me alone." Rebecca blinked, clearly taken aback. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "We didn't mean to upset you. I said, leave me alone." Clara's voice rose higher than she intended, her fear transforming into something sharper. Her hands shook more violently, and she stood up, clutching her album like a shield. The teenagers froze, awkward and unsure of what to do next. Clara felt her chest tighten. She didn't want to be rude, but the emotions were too much. The memories, the missing photo, were all closing in on her, and the last thing she wanted was for anyone to see her like this. Jason, sensing the tension, gently pulled Rebecca back. "It's okay," he said quietly. "Let's go." The group backed away, retreating to a nearby bench. Clara stood there for a moment, her heart still racing, before sinking back down onto the bench. The album rested on her lap, but she couldn't bring herself to open it again. Jason couldn't shake the encounter from his mind. He sat on the park bench, watching Clara from a distance. She looked even smaller now, huddled on the bench, staring at nothing. The others chatted quietly beside him, but Jason's focus remained on Clara. "That didn't go well," Dylan muttered, glancing at Clara. "No kidding," Rebecca sighed. "I thought we were helping." "Maybe we shouldn't have approached her so suddenly," Mia said, her voice thoughtful. "She seemed really scared." Jason nodded but didn't say anything. He understood Clara's fear more than he cared to admit. Since his dad's death, he'd found himself retreating into his own world, pushing people away. Maybe Clara felt something similar, afraid of being vulnerable, afraid of losing control. But there was something else in her eyes, something deeper than just fear. "We should try again," Jason said suddenly, surprising himself. "But maybe we should just give her some space first." Rebecca looked at him, surprised. "You want to try again?" "She practically yelled at us." "She didn't mean it," Jason said. "She's just going through something. I can feel it." The others exchanged glances, unsure, but eventually they nodded. Jason's quiet conviction carried weight. He stood up, watching as Clara gathered her things and slowly walked out of the park, her shoulders hunched. "We'll try again," Jason said softly, "when she's ready." Jason couldn't let it go. After their awkward encounter with Clara, he found himself thinking about her constantly. Every time he passed the park, he half expected to see her on her usual bench, clutching that old photo album, lost in her own world. The image of her trembling hands and the sadness in her eyes haunted him. "She's there again," Jason said quietly, nudging Rebecca as they passed the park a few days later. Clara was sitting in her usual spot under the oak tree, her eyes downcast as she turned the pages of her album. She looks worse. Rebecca glanced over at Clara and sighed. I don't know, Jason. She made it pretty clear she didn't want us around. Yeah, Dylan added. I don't want to freak her out again. Old people can be pretty set in their ways. Jason frowned. It's not about that. I think there's more going on with her. I don't know, I feel like we should do something. She's all alone. Mia, who had been sketching quietly beside them, finally spoke up. She's lonely and scared. I could see it in the way she looked at us. It's not that she doesn't want help, she's just afraid to accept it. Jason nodded. Exactly. I think we came on too strong last time. Maybe if we just show her we're here without being in her face, she'll open up. Rebecca tilted her head, considering it. Okay, but how do we do that without scaring her again? Let's just be there, Jason said. Not pushy, not up in her space. Let's give her time. But we can start by leaving her something. Maybe just a note or a little gift. Something small so she knows we mean well. Dylan smirked. What are we, secret admirers now? Mia shot him a look. It's not about that. It's about showing her that people care. Jason nodded. Yeah, exactly. Let's do it. The next day, the teens returned to the park. Clara was sitting in her usual spot, but today she seemed even more withdrawn, her eyes darting around nervously, her hands shaking as she flipped through her album. Jason watched from a distance, feeling a knot form in his stomach. He wished there was a way to break through her fear, but he knew it had to be done slowly, carefully. Rebecca pulled a small bunch of flowers from her backpack. I picked these from my mom's garden, she said with a grin. Think she'll like them? Jason smiled. It's perfect. Mia quickly sketched a simple note. We're here if you need anything. She tucked it neatly between the flowers, and together they approached Clara's bench. They didn't get too close, just close enough to leave the flowers on the bench beside her while she was engrossed in her album. Let's get out of here before she sees us, Dylan whispered. They retreated to a nearby bench and watched as Clara eventually noticed the flowers. She hesitated at first, glancing around suspiciously, but then her face softened. Her trembling fingers picked up the flowers, and when she spotted the note, her eyes lingered on it for a long moment. Jason felt a flicker of hope as he watched her reaction. It wasn't much, but it was something. Over the next few days, the teens continued their quiet gestures. They left small notes, flowers, and even a packet of cookies Mia's mom had baked. They kept their distance, but Clara began to expect their offerings. Each time she found something left on her bench, her expression softened a little more. One afternoon, Jason decided it was time to try again. They had given Clara space, and now maybe she'd be more open to talking. Let's go see if she's ready to talk, he said to the group. Rebecca raised an eyebrow. You sure? What if she freaks out again? I don't think she will, Jason said. She's starting to trust us, I can tell. With hesitant steps, the teens approached Clara once again. This time, instead of flinching, Clara looked up at them, her eyes wide but not fearful. Jason noticed her grip on the album wasn't as tight as before. Hi, Ms. Clara, Jason said softly. We've been leaving you those little gifts. I hope you like them. Clara blinked, her gaze moving from Jason to the others. She hesitated, then nodded. Yes, I wasn't sure if it was you. Thank you. Jason smiled, relieved that she hadn't shut them down. We just wanted to help. You seemed like you were having a tough time. Clara's eyes filled with uncertainty, but she didn't push them away this time. I've been looking for something, she said quietly. Something important. Mia stepped forward, her voice gentle. Can we help you find it? Clara hesitated, her fingers trembling as she opened the photo album on her lap. She flipped through the pages carefully until she reached a blank space, an empty spot where a photograph had clearly once been. "It's my wedding picture," Clara said, her voice cracking slightly. "The only one I have of my husband and me. I can't find it." Jason's heart sank. "When did you last see it?" Clara's brow furrowed in thought. I think I was showing it to a friend last week. I must have dropped it somewhere. I've been looking for it ever since, but I can't find it." Rebecca's expression softened with empathy. "That must be so hard. We'll help you look, Ms. Clara. We'll search the whole park if we have to." Clara's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of gratitude. "I don't know if you can help, but thank you. It means a lot to me." Jason exchanged a determined look with the others. "We'll find it," he said, his voice steady. "We won't stop until we do." The teens quickly got to work, spreading out across the park. Jason took the area near the playground, Rebecca searched the basketball court, Dylan scanned the parking lot, and Mia focused on the walking paths. They asked other park goers if they had seen anything, showing them a sketch Mia had quickly drawn based on Clara's description of the photo. A beautiful, simple sketch of a young couple on their wedding day. But after hours of searching, they had no luck. Jason met up with the others near Clara's bench. His shoulders slumped as he approached her, his heart heavy with disappointment. Clara was still sitting there, clutching her album, her eyes full of quiet hope. "We haven't found it yet," Jason said softly, kneeling beside her. "But we're not giving up. We'll keep looking." Clara gave him a sad smile, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't know how much this means to me." Rebecca sat down beside Clara, her gentle voice. "We'll find it, Miss Clara. We promise." As the days passed, the teens continued their search, scouring every inch of the park and surrounding areas. They even checked nearby streets, asking store owners and local residents if they had seen the photograph. But no one had. Jason grew more frustrated with each passing day. He had promised Clara they'd find the photo, and he hated the thought of letting her down. But as time went on, the likelihood of finding it seemed to slip further and further away. One afternoon, as they were gathering near Clara's bench, Dylan suddenly spoke up. "Wait, I think I know where the photo might be." Jason turned to him, his heart leaping with hope. "What do you mean?" Dylan's face was serious. "I volunteer at that thrift shop a few blocks away. I saw a picture just like the one Mia drew a few days ago. It was on a frame, being sold as an antique. I didn't think much of it at the time, but it might be Ms. Clara's photo." Jason's eyes widened. "You think it was hers?" Dylan nodded. "Yeah, I mean, it's worth checking, right?" Without wasting a second, Jason sprang to his feet. "Let's go. Now." The teens raced to the thrift shop, their hearts pounding with anticipation. When they burst through the door, the elderly shop owner, Mr. Lewis, looked up from behind the counter, surprised by their sudden entrance. "Mr. Lewis," Dylan called out, breathless, "we need your help. Did you have a wedding photo come in recently?" Mr. Lewis adjusted his glasses and shuffled over to a stack of framed pictures leaning against the wall. "Let's see. I did get a few pictures in earlier this week." The teens watched anxiously as Mr. Lewis sorted through the pile. Finally, he pulled out a framed photograph, holding it up for them to see. Dylan's heart sank. It wasn't the right photo. "No, that's not it," Dylan said, shaking his head. "The one I saw was different. Do you remember another one?" Mr. Lewis's face brightened with recognition. "Oh, yes. There was another, a lovely black and white photograph of a couple on their wedding day. But I'm afraid it was sold earlier today." Jason felt his stomach drop. "Sold?" Mr. Lewis nodded. "Yes, A gentleman came in and bought it right off the shelf. Said it reminded him of his own family. Jason clenched his fists in frustration. They were so close to finding Clara's photo, and now it was gone. "Do you know who bought it?" Rebecca asked, her voice tense. Mr. Lewis frowned. "I didn't get his name, but he mentioned he lives nearby. I could leave a message for him if he comes back." Jason exchanged a defeated glance with his friends. They had been so close to finding the photo, and now it felt like it had slipped through their fingers. But they weren't giving up. Not yet. "We'll leave a message," Jason said firmly. "And we'll keep looking." The walk back from the thrift shop was filled with an unsettling silence. Jason, Rebecca, Dylan, and Mia trudged along the sidewalk, their earlier urgency now weighed down by the disappointment that hung heavy in the air. Jason's fists were still clenched tightly at his sides, his mind racing. How could they have come so close to finding Clara's photo only to lose it? "I can't believe it," Rebecca muttered, kicking a stray rock down the path. "We were right there." "We'll figure it out," Mia said quietly, though even she seemed unsure. Her usual calm demeanor was shaken by the gravity of the situation. Dylan was the first to break the silence with a frustrated sigh. "I should have remembered earlier. If we'd gotten there sooner, maybe—" "Stop," Jason interrupted, his voice sharper than he intended. "It's not your fault, okay? None of us knew." His words came out harsher than he meant, his frustration building not just with the situation but with the feeling of helplessness that had been gnawing at him for days. He hated letting people down, especially someone like Clara, who had already lost so much. The group fell quiet again, each of them wrestling with their own thoughts. By the time they reached the park, Clara was still sitting on her bench, staring out across the lawn. The photo album was open on her lap, but the pages had been left untouched, as though even the memories within it couldn't soothe her anymore. Jason swallowed hard. This was the part he dreaded. They had to tell her. "I'll do it," Jason said before anyone else could volunteer. He didn't want to put the burden on his friends. This was his promise, and he intended to face it head on. He walked up to Clara slowly, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. Clara looked up as he approached, her eyes hopeful and tired all at once. The sight of her frailty made Jason's throat tighten. "Ms. Clara," he began, sitting down next to her. He rubbed the back of his neck, searching for the right words, but none of them seemed right. We went to the thrift shop. We found out that your photo, someone bought it." Clara's face fell, her eyes immediately clouding with sorrow. She looked down at the album in her lap, her fingers tracing the empty spot where the wedding photo had once been. Jason could hear the tremble in her voice when she finally spoke. "It's gone, isn't it?" she whispered, more to herself than to him. "It's really gone." Jason shook his head, fighting the surge of emotion that rose in his chest. "No, Ms. Clara, it's not gone. We're going to find it. We left a message with the shop owner, and he'll let us know if the buyer comes back. We won't stop looking, I promise." Clara didn't respond right away. Her frail hands closed the album slowly, and she sighed a deep, weary sigh that felt like the weight of years pressing down on her shoulders. "Jason, I know you mean well," she said softly, "but I think it's time for me to let it go." Jason's heart sank. "Don't say that, Ms. Clara. We're not giving up. You don't have to give up either." Clara smiled weakly, but it was a smile filled with sadness rather than hope. "I've lost so much already," she whispered. Maybe it's time I stop holding on so tightly." Jason couldn't stand the defeat in her voice. He could feel the frustration building up inside him, the helplessness of not being able to fix this for her. "We'll find it," Jason repeated, almost to himself this time. "We have to." Later that evening, the group gathered at Mia's house. Her living room, usually filled with laughter and conversation, was unusually quiet as they sat around the table, picking at the leftover pizza in front of them. Jason was the most agitated, tapping his fingers against the side of his chair, his mind a whirlwind of frustration and guilt. "We've tried everything," Rebecca said with a sigh. "I don't know what else we can do. We've asked everyone in the park, checked the stores, and left messages. What if the guy who bought it never comes back?" Mia, who had been quietly sketching at the table, paused and looked up. "We can't think like that. We have to stay positive. We'll find it. I'm sure of it." Dylan, sitting next to Mia, frowned. "I'm with Rebecca on this one. We've done all we can. Maybe it's time we just... No." Jason's sudden outburst startled everyone at the table. His voice was sharp, and the anger simmering beneath the surface finally spilled over. "We're not giving up, okay? We can't just stop looking because it's hard. She's depending on us." The room fell silent. Jason's outburst hung heavy in the air, and for a moment no one knew what to say. "Jason..." Mia started softly, but Jason stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor as he pushed it back. "I need some air," he muttered, storming out of the house before anyone could stop him. Jason walked down the empty street, his emotions boiling over. He didn't know why this was hitting him so hard. It wasn't just about the photo, it was everything. His dad's death, the feeling of being powerless to stop the things that hurt the people he cared about. It all felt like too much. He kicked at the gravel on the sidewalk, his frustration growing with every step. Why couldn't he fix this? Why couldn't he make things right? Jason found himself back at the park, sitting on the same bench where Clara always sat. The night air was cool and the park was empty, save for the soft rustle of leaves in the trees above him. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and buried his face in his hands. He felt so useless. His mind wandered to the last time he saw his dad, the hospital room, the machines beeping, the sterile smell of disinfectant that still haunted his dreams. He had promised his dad that he would be strong, that he'd take care of his mom and little sister. But how could he do that when he couldn't even help Clara find a simple photograph? The sound of footsteps pulled Jason out of his thoughts. He looked up to see Mia walking toward him, her sketchbook tucked under her arm. "Thought I'd find you here," she said, sitting down next to him. Jason didn't say anything. He didn't know what to say. Mia opened her sketchbook and flipped through the pages until she reached a new drawing, a detailed sketch of Clara sitting on her bench holding the photo album in her lap, her face etched with both sadness and hope. The sketch was so raw, so full of emotion, that Jason could feel his throat tightened. "I drew this today," Mia said quietly. "I've been thinking a lot about Clara. And about you." Jason looked at her, confused. "Me?" Mia nodded. "You've been carrying so much, Jason. Not just with Clara, but with everything. I know you're trying to help her, but I think part of why this is so important to you is because you haven't been able to help yourself." Jason looked down, his chest tightening. "What are you talking about?" "You never talk about your dad," Mia said softly. "I know you've been keeping it all inside, trying to be strong for everyone else. But you don't have to carry this all on your own. You don't have to fix everything. Sometimes it's enough to just be there for people." Jason swallowed hard, her words hitting him like a ton of bricks. "But I want to fix it," he said, his voice cracking. "I promised her we'd find the photo. I promised I'd help her." Mia placed a hand on his shoulder. "You are helping her just by being there. She doesn't need you to fix everything, Jason. She just needs to know that she's not alone." Jason looked at Mia, his eyes stinging with unshed tears. He hadn't cried in so long, not since his dad's funeral, but now, sitting here with Mia, The weight of everything he had been carrying finally started to lift. "Thanks, Mia," he said quietly, wiping his eyes. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Mia smiled softly. "You don't have to do it alone, Jason. We're all in this together." The next day, the teens met at the park again, but this time there was a new sense of resolve in the air. Jason felt lighter somehow, as though he had finally let go of some of the burden he had been carrying. He wasn't going to stop searching for Clara's photo, but he also wasn't going to let the frustration consume him anymore. As they sat on the bench, discussing their next steps, a figure appeared at the park's entrance. It was a man, probably in his early 40s, with a gentle smile on his face. He was holding a small framed photograph in his hands. "Excuse me," the man called out, walking toward them. "Are you the ones looking for a wedding photo?" Jason's heart skipped a beat. He stood up quickly, his eyes locked on the frame in the man's hands. "Yeah," he said, his voice filled with both hope and disbelief. "Do you have it?" The man nodded, holding up the photo for them to see. "I bought this from a thrift shop earlier today. It looked important. And when I heard about what you were doing for Ms. Clara, I knew I had to bring it back." Jason's heart raced as he stepped closer, his eyes widening as he took in the image. It was Clara's wedding photo, perfectly preserved in a simple, elegant frame. "Thank you," Jason whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you so much." The man smiled warmly. "I'm just glad I could help. This photo belongs to her." Jason turned to his friends, a huge grin spreading across his face. "We did it," he said, barely able to contain his excitement. "We found it." The air in the park felt lighter than it had in days. The teens couldn't believe it. They had actually found Clara's missing photograph. Jason clutched the frame carefully, his hands trembling slightly. It was surreal to hold the very object that had eluded them for so long. "Let's go," Jason said, his voice brimming with excitement. "We have to show her." The others nodded in agreement, barely able to contain their smiles as they walked briskly toward Clara's house. There was new energy in their steps, a sense of accomplishment that had been absent before. They had promised Clara they would help her, and now, after days of searching and uncertainty, they were finally about to make good on that promise. As they neared Clara's house, Jason felt a knot of anticipation form in his chest. What would she say when she saw it? How would she react? The thought of seeing the relief and joy on her face filled him with a deep sense of purpose. It wasn't just about the photograph anymore. It was about showing Clara that she wasn't alone, that people cared about her and her memories. Jason knocked gently on Clara's door. A few moments passed, and then the door creaked open. Clara stood there, her eyes weary but warm, the familiar photo album clutched against her chest. "Ms. Clara," Jason began, a grin spreading across his face. "We have something for you." Clara looked at him curiously, her gaze shifting to the frame in his hands. For a moment, she didn't seem to register what she was seeing, but then her breath caught and her eyes widened in disbelief. Her hands flew to her mouth as tears began to well up in her eyes. Is that... Clara's voice trembled. Jason nodded, holding the photo out to her. "We found it, Ms. Clara. It's your wedding photo. It was sold at a thrift shop, but the man who bought it knew it was special and brought it back." Clara's hand shook as she reached for the frame, her fingers lightly brushing the glass. She stared at the black and white image of her and her late husband, John, standing side by side on their wedding day, their smiles frozen in time. The memories of that day rushed back to her. The sound of church bells, the warmth of John's hand in hers, the promises they made to each other under the summer sun. For a long moment, Clara couldn't speak. She simply gazed at the photograph, her tears spilling over. Finally, she whispered. I thought I had lost him all over again, but you brought him back to me. Jason's throat tightened with emotion. We're just glad we could help. You don't deserve to lose something so important. Clara's eyes filled with gratitude as she looked up at the teens. You've done more than help, Jason. You gave me back a part of my heart. I'll never be able to thank you enough. The teens stood there in silence, overwhelmed by the depth of the moment. They had spent days searching for a simple photograph, but in doing so they had given Clara something far greater, the sense that she wasn't alone in her grief. Her memories, and by extension her love for John, were no longer something she carried by herself. After the emotional reunion with the photo, Clara invited the teens inside for tea. They sat around her small kitchen table, the photo album resting between them, and listened as Clara spoke about her life with John. She told stories about their early days of courtship, their wedding, the life they had built together, and the joy they had shared. Her words were filled with both love and sorrow, but there was something peaceful in the way she spoke, as if the return of the photograph had mended a part of her soul that had been broken. Jason found himself captivated by her stories, each one a glimpse into a life filled with love and resilience. He felt connected to Clara in a way he hadn't expected, as if her story had unlocked something in him too. The loss of his father had left him feeling untethered, but hearing Clara speak about the memories she had held onto for so long made him realize that loss didn't have to mean letting go. As the evening wore on, the teens began to talk about how they could do more for Clara. Returning the photograph had been a victory, but they wanted to show her just how much she meant to the community. Jason was the first to suggest something bigger, a celebration. Why don't we throw her a party? Jason said, his eyes lighting up with excitement. Like a surprise party. We could invite everyone from the neighborhood, and it could be a way to celebrate Clara and everything she's done for this community. Rebecca grinned. I love it. We could do it at the park, where she always sits with her photo album. It would be perfect. Mia's artistic mind was already buzzing with ideas. I could paint something for her, a mural maybe. Something that honors her and her husband and all the memories they shared. Dylan nodded eagerly. I'll handle the food. My mom can make her famous casseroles and we can ask other neighbors to pitch in. Jason looked at Clara, who was listening quietly, her eyes filled with emotion. What do you think, Ms. Clara? Would you be okay with that? Clara smiled, her eyes shimmering with tears. I don't know what to say. You've already done so much for me. A party. It's more than I could ever ask for. Jason shook his head. You deserve it, Ms. Clara. You've been such an important part of this neighborhood for so long, and it's time we show you how much you mean to all of us. Clara wiped her eyes, clearly overwhelmed. I would love that, Jason, more than you know. The next morning, the teens sprang into action. They split up the tasks. Jason took the lead on organizing the guest list, while Rebecca focused on decorating the park. Dylan coordinated the food, and Mia began working on the mural she planned to unveil at the party. It was an ambitious project, but they were all driven by the desire to give Clara something unforgettable. Word of the surprise party spread quickly through the neighborhood. Families who had known Clara for years, as well as new residents who had only seen her from afar, all offered to help in some way. The elderly chess players from the park volunteered to set up tables and chairs. The mothers who sat near the playground offered to bring food. Even the teens from the basketball court chipped in, offering to help with the heavy lifting. As the day of the party approached, the park began to transform. Colorful banners hung from the trees, picnic tables were set up, and twinkling lights were strung between the branches. The mural, Mia, had painted a beautiful, vibrant depiction of Clara and John on their wedding day, surrounded by scenes from their life together, was hidden behind a large draped canvas, waiting to be revealed. Jason looked around at the scene with a sense of pride. It wasn't just a party. It was a celebration of Clara's life and the love she had shared with her husband. It was a way for the community to come together and show her that she mattered. On the afternoon of the party, the park was buzzing with activity. Neighbors gathered, chatting excitedly, and setting up food and drinks. The atmosphere was filled with anticipation as they awaited Clara's arrival. Jason stood at the entrance of the park, his heart pounding with excitement. Clara and her nephew David, the man who had returned the photograph, were on their way. David had been invited to join the celebration after reconnecting with Clara, and the bond between them had quickly grown. It felt fitting that he would be there for this special moment. Finally, Jason spotted them walking down the path. Clara, dressed in a simple but elegant dress, held David's arm as they approached the park. Her eyes were filled with curiosity, unaware of the surprise that awaited her. When they reached the park, Jason gave the signal. The crowd erupted into cheers and applause. "Surprise, Ms. Clara!" they shouted in unison. Clara froze, her eyes wide with astonishment. She looked around at the familiar faces, the neighbors she had known for years, the teens who had become her friends, and even people she barely recognized, all gathered to celebrate her. Her eyes filled with tears as she realized what was happening. Jason stepped forward, his voice filled with emotion. "Ms. Clara, this is for you. We wanted to show you just how much you mean to all of us. Thank you for everything you've done for this community. You're the heart of this neighborhood, and we're so lucky to have you." Clara's hand flew to her mouth, overwhelmed by the love and support that surrounded her. Tears streamed down her face as she smiled at the crowd, unable to find the words to express what she was feeling. Mia stepped forward, taking Clara's hand gently. "There's one more thing we want to show you." Jason nodded to Dylan and Rebecca, who pulled away the draped canvas, revealing the mural Mia had painted. The crowd gasped in admiration at the beautiful artwork, a stunning depiction of Clara and John on their wedding day, surrounded by scenes from their lives together. The mural captured the essence of their love and the legacy they had built. Clara stared at the mural, her breath catching in her throat. She reached out, her fingers lightly tracing the painted image of her and John. It was as if the mural had brought their love back to life, preserving it for everyone to see. "We love you, Ms. Clara," the teens said together, their voices filled with warmth. Clara turned to them, her heart full to bursting. She couldn't stop the tears from flowing, but they were tears of pure joy. "I don't have the words," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. This is more than I ever could have imagined. Thank you. Thank you, all of you, for reminding me that I'm not alone." As the sun began to set, the party continued with laughter, music, and conversation. Clara sat at the center of it all, surrounded by the people who had come together to celebrate her life and her memories. She felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. David sat beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "You've touched so many lives, Aunt Clara. This community loves you." Clara smiled, her eyes shining with gratitude. "I never realized how much I was a part of it all. After losing John, I thought I had lost my place here. But now, I see that I was wrong." Jason watched from a distance, a sense of fulfillment washing over him. This was more than just a party. It was a reminder that no one was truly alone, even in their darkest moments. He thought of his father, and for the first time in a long time, he felt at peace. Mia came up beside him, nudging him gently. "We did it." Jason smiled. "Yeah, we did." As the evening wore on and the stars began to twinkle above, Clara looked out at the mural of her and John, knowing that their love had been immortalized in a way that would live on long after she was gone. She wasn't alone anymore. She had her memories, her family, her friends, and she had a community that loved her. And that was more than enough. As the party in the park continued into the night, the energy slowly shifted from excitement to a peaceful, reflective atmosphere. Children ran around the playground, laughter echoed through the trees, and neighbors shared stories around the picnic tables. It was a celebration, yes, but more than that, it felt like a culmination of something profound, something that had united the entire community in a way few things could. Clara sat under the large oak tree, watching the mural of her and John glow softly in the light of the nearby lanterns. It was breathtaking the way Mia had captured not just their likenesses, but the essence of their love. The mural wasn't just a tribute to her past. It was a reminder that memories could live on through the people who loved you. Her nephew David sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders. The bond they had formed in the short time since he'd returned was deep, like a connection that had been waiting years to blossom. Clara had lived for so long thinking she had no family left close by, and now here David was a piece of her history, a link to the life she thought had been lost. "This is beautiful, Aunt Clara," David said softly, looking at the mural. "I can see how much love you and Uncle John shared." Clara smiled, her eyes misting again. "We had a good life, David. We were lucky to have each other for so long." David nodded, then hesitated before speaking again. "You know, I was afraid I'd never find you. I've spent years looking for family, for anyone who could tell me more about my mom's side. I didn't think I'd be lucky enough to find someone like you." Clara turned to him, her hand resting on his. "You've given me back something I thought I'd lost forever. You're a part of this family, David. John and I would have loved to have you with us all these years, but we have now, and that's what matters." David smiled, the weight of his own search lightened by Clara's warmth. "We do, and I'm not going anywhere." Clara felt a deep sense of contentment wash over her. For so long she had thought she was alone in her memories, trapped in a past that only lived in the pages of her photo album. But now, sitting here with David and surrounded by her community, she realizes that her memories were alive in the people around her, in the lives she had touched, and in the love that had found its way back to her. As the evening wore on, Jason and his friends gathered near the mural. They had been quietly watching Clara, soaking in the overwhelming joy of the day. There was a sense of pride that came with knowing they had played a part in giving Clara back something priceless. But Jason still felt like there was one more thing they needed to do to make this night unforgettable. "I've been thinking," Jason said, glancing at the others. "Clara's been through so much, losing John, losing the photo, but we gave her back part of her memories tonight. I think we should give her something else too." Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "Like what? I mean, this party is pretty epic. What more could we give her?" Jason smiled thoughtfully. "We should say something. I think it'd be nice if we could each tell her how much she means to us, how she's been a part of our lives even if she didn't know it." Mia's face brightened with excitement. "Like a tribute. That's perfect. We could gather everyone and have a moment where we each share what she's meant to us." Dylan nodded. "I'm down. I've been coming to this park for years and never thought about how much of a fixture she was here. She's a part of this place." Rebecca grinned. "Okay, let's do it. I'll get everyone's attention." Within minutes, the teens had gathered the crowd near the mural. The murmuring quieted as the community turned their attention toward the center, curious about what was about to happen. Jason stepped forward, his heart pounding a little in his chest, but there was a sense of purpose driving him now. He wanted to make sure Clara knew how much she was loved, not just by him and his friends, but by everyone whose lives she had touched in the quiet ways that only someone like Clara could. "Ms. Clara," Jason began, his voice clear and steady, "we wanted to take a moment to tell you just how much you mean to all of us. You've been part of this neighborhood for so long, and even if some of us didn't realize it, you've touched all of our lives in ways that we'll never forget." Clara's eyes widened, and she clasped her hands together in front of her, clearly moved by the gesture. Jason continued, "For me, you've shown me that it's okay to hold on to memories, even when they hurt. You reminded me that the people we love never really leave us, as long as we keep their memories alive. And because of you, I've learned how important it is to be there for each other, just like you've been there for us." He paused, and the others took their turns speaking. Rebecca smiled warmly. "Ms. Clara, you've always been such a presence in this park. I never knew how much you were going through, but now that I do, I'm so glad we got to help you. You're strong, and your love for your husband is an inspiration to all of us." Dylan nodded in agreement. "Yeah, you've been like the glue holding this place together. Even when we didn't see it, you were always here, a part of the park. I'm glad we could give back to you, even if it was just finding a photo. You've done so much more than that for us." Mia stepped forward last, her voice soft but filled with emotion. "Miss Clara, when I was painting that mural, I thought a lot about the love you and John shared. It's so rare to see a love like that, and it's beautiful to know that it's something that will live on, not just in your memories, but in all of ours too." Clara sat quietly, tears streaming down her face as she listened to each of them. The crowd was silent, the weight of the moment hanging in the cool evening air. It wasn't just a tribute to Clara, it was a tribute to everything she represented. Love, resilience, and the power of memories to keep the people we care about close, even after they're gone. As the teens finished speaking, the crowd erupted into soft applause, their admiration for Clara palpable in the air. Clara, overwhelmed by the outpouring of love and gratitude, stood slowly from her chair. She looked out at the faces of her neighbors, the families she had seen grow up, the teenagers who had become her unexpected friends, and the nephew who had found his way back to her after all these years. She took a deep breath, wiping at her eyes. "I don't know how to begin to thank all of you," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I've spent so many years feeling like the world was slipping away from me. After John passed, I thought I had lost everything. But tonight, you've all shown me that I was never really alone. You've reminded me that love doesn't disappear just because someone is gone." Clara glanced at the mural, her gaze softening as she looked at the painted image of her and John on their wedding day. "This mural, this party, it's more than I could have ever asked for. It's a gift I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. And you, all of you, you've given me a second chance at feeling connected to the world again." The crowd stood in quiet reverence as Clara continued. "Thank you for showing me that I'm part of something bigger than just my memories. I'm part of this community, and I always will be." Jason felt a lump form in his throat as Clara's words sank in. This wasn't just a celebration of her past. It was a recognition of how much she still had to offer, how much her presence mattered to everyone there. He knew deep down that this was the true climax of their journey, not finding the photo, but finding the connection that had been lost between Clara and the world around her. As the evening drew to a close, the guests began to disperse, carrying with them a sense of warmth and unity that would linger long after the party ended. Clara stayed a little longer, sitting quietly with Jason, Rebecca, Dylan, Mia, and David under the oak tree. The mural glowed softly in the moonlight, a permanent reminder of the love that had brought them all together. Clara turned to Jason, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You've all done so much for me. I feel like I have a new family now, one that's here with me every day." Jason smiled. "You do, Ms. Clara, and we're not going anywhere." Clara leaned back against the bench, her heart full. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the weight of loneliness pressing down on her. Instead, she felt the gentle embrace of love, friendship, and the knowledge that her memories and her life would live on in the people who cared about her. As the last of the lanterns flickered out, Clara closed her eyes, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. The future, once so uncertain, now felt bright and full of possibility. She wasn't alone anymore. She never would be again. Thank you so much for joining us on this emotional journey with Clara and her community. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more heartwarming tales like this one, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload, and share this video with someone who could use a reminder of the power of community and love. We love hearing from you, so if you've ever experienced a moment where kindness or connection made a big difference in your life, share it with us in the comments below. Let's keep spreading positivity, one story at a time. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.